edition of the local soccer show. No Stevie P today. He was busy, so Presidente is taking over. Today we have our first two-capped guest ever to talk about what happened in the U-17 Canada FIFA World Tournament in Indonesia. We're going to delve into some of the issues and what can be done to improve. So we hope our Canadian youngsters in future tournaments will be able to perform at a higher level. It was very disappointing, and we're going to talk about some of the reasons and propose some solutions. Before we get started, we'd like to thank Evangelista Sports for their support. Go to evangelistasports.com to get all your soccer gear. Spring is just around the corner. Not only do you get stuff for yourself or for your kids, but they also supply many of the clubs in our city for all your gear that you need, whether it would be uniforms, socks, track jackets, bags, whatever you need. Evangelista Sports is there to help out and supply all the community clubs in our wonderful city. So we're going to do our little intro video, and then we're going to welcome our special guest. Ciao, Richard. Welcome again to the local soccer show. You're our first time guest that's been here for a second time. Welcome and happy birthday.
Ciao, Marcello. Thank you. It's an honor to be back, especially on my birthday.
There you go. What a way to start your day. So, Richard, as I mentioned in my intro, today we'd like to talk about the U-17 Indonesia FIFA tournament and look at the results of Canada's 3 matches. And we want to tie it into amateur soccer. As you know, our show is all about local soccer. We often talk about things that, from the U4 to U12 age, more than older ages. So what I'd like to do is start off maybe from the younger age moving up. I know you're well aware of this stuff more than myself, but as we talked a bit offline, what are your thoughts of how our players are developed from U4 to U12? We can start with that. Then we have a gap from U13 to U16, which is another path that the kids follow as they get out of the grassroots, to then look at the performance of what happened in Canada, which we'll talk about at the end. So in terms of competitiveness, what have you seen from your experience of how we develop players till U12, and what happens from U13 to U16 that seems like we dip a bit in terms of how we perform versus other countries, and then we move on to the U17 tournament. So go ahead. Let's start with U4 to U12 in terms of comparing Canada to other countries in that age range.
Sure. Okay. So it's a good broad question, and yeah. I'll only start before I answer your question, just to say about the men's U17 team and the performance. That okay. So we lost all 3 games. We conceded, I don't know how many goals, 12 or something, or
10 goals.
10
we
goals.
Scored
okay.
1 and conceded
right.
10.
Okay. So not a good performance at all. So basically, we have to look at that objectively and say, well, either those players that were on that Canadian men's under 17 national team are the best young, 16-year-old boys, the best that we have, in which case we are not doing a good enough job developing our players because they're not able to compete even in the group stage of a world tournament. Or the alternative is maybe those are not the best players that we have, in which case we need to do a much better job of talent identification and recruitment. So, I suspect it's a little bit of both, and I'll give
I would agree with you.
My ideas. Yeah. So now we work backwards. You asking me about, so under 4, let's say up to, I think 12 you said, or whatever. So it's an interesting question, and maybe contrasting what's happening in the rest of the world. So like, it's not as though if you were to go to South America or maybe to Europe, that you would see coaching or development happening at 4, 5, 6 years old. Like this is not kind
Correct.
of, so it's definitely not coaching. There is a bit of a difference in culture, and I'll give maybe perhaps it's a different take. I don't know. I mean, I can tell you from my own experience. I've
Yeah,
not
for
studied
sure.
it, but I can tell you from my own
Absolutely.
experience because I lived in South America. I lived in Uruguay for a year, and I worked in the professional game there. And I mean, I've been around. I've presented my research at conferences all over the world. I've been with the national teams and traveled all over the world and worked in many other countries in the game. So what I see is from a very young age here, we are protecting children from all forms of, I'll call it resistance.
Hmm.
And I'll use a sports science analogy, which is that when we want to make muscles stronger, the legs, the heart, muscles only become stronger when they encounter resistance. Okay, you cannot improve your
Absolutely.
fitness. It's a simple
Yeah.
analogy, maybe, but you cannot improve
Well,
your
you're
fitness if
right.
you never have resistance. You need to train hard. You need to push yourself. And so I almost see, the mind of a young athlete and the personality of a young athlete, and eventually even the work ethic and the resilience of a young athlete, that has to, in order for that to improve, that young athlete needs to encounter some forms of resistance. Now, I don't mean yelling and screaming. I don't mean,
Yeah.
abuse, obviously, no, nothing like that. But what I do mean is it seems as though in Canada we are protecting children, or well, we think we're protecting them, but what we're actually doing is we are preventing them from experiencing any resistance. So they get into these soccer programs at a young age, and not only is it all about fun, it needs to be fun, but it's a free
Hmm.
for all. There are no scores kept. There's a complete de-emphasizing on any form of competition. Even the way that we instruct young coaches or the coaches of young children is we constantly talk to them about these concepts of safe sport and self-esteem, and
Hmm.
not disciplining players, not criticizing them, all of that. And I think it started with people's hearts and minds being in the right place, which is that we don't want yelling and screaming, we don't want abuse, we don't want to destroy the morale of young children when they're athletes. But at the same time, and maybe not at 4 years old, but certainly by
Yes.
7, by 8, by 9, you mentioned all the way to 12. If there aren't some rules, if there isn't some discipline, if there aren't some standards that we hold young athletes to in whatever soccer programs they're in, we're kind of setting them up for failure because they're never encountering any resistance. They're constantly being made to feel like they're special, even when they don't do anything special.
Yeah.
They're constantly being made to feel like whatever they do is totally fine. There are no standards. There are no rules, no competition, nothing. So they never encounter resistance. And because they never encounter any kind of resistance, I think later on, we're seeing a lack of resiliency, a lack of work ethic. There's a lot of
Yeah.
entitlement. I'll get to what I've literally
Yeah.
experienced.
The entitlement part, I do agree with you. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so all of that, I think that's a challenge that I think, and a good coach should be able to have discipline, to have standards, but also to make things fun. I think the problem is that we have, people who are too ideologically driven, that are thinking about psychology and all these other things, but they don't understand reality of sports and competition. And so, we're focusing so much on trying to build up this concept of self-esteem, and we
Yeah.
think that by again treating kids like they're special and they can do no wrong, that we're helping their self-esteem. I believe you hurt somebody's self-esteem when you treat them like they're special all the time. Because if you grow up from the age of 5, every single coach, teacher is constantly just treating you like you're special, then you're going to think you're special. You're going to think the rules don't apply to you. You're going to think you don't have to train very hard. You're going to think it doesn't matter whether you show up to training on time, whether you have a good work ethic, whether you just think the world owes you a living. And so that to me is a cultural problem that we have. That's the first thing. Okay. The
Yeah.
second, and it's a little bit tied into it. I've spoken about this. I've written about this. this is something which is really even personal to me. I call it the overtraining myth. And what I mean is, and I'll give you the background so you understand. In the last 2 decades, maybe even in the last 3 decades, let's say till the 1990s or so, or if we go that far back, if we were to plot the amount of youth soccer and other youth sports as well, but we're talking soccer here. So youth soccer injuries, there's been a very steep rise in the number of injuries. And I'm not talking about 2 players go for a ball and, someone sprains their ankle or whatever. Like that happens. Those are contact injuries. I'm talking about soft tissue, tendonitis, ligament sprains, and even ligament tears, like in the knee, for example, or the ankle, torn muscles or muscle strains, things like that you never used to hear about 10-year-olds or even 11 or 12-year-olds getting these types of injuries until the late 1990s, the early 2000s. So we've seen a steep rise in youth injuries. And again, some people who I think were just misguided looked into it and said, well, what's been happening in soccer in the last few decades? Well, we've gone from less training. Back in the day, club soccer was a couple of days a week and tournaments on weekends here and there. Now they're training more. Now they're practicing more. There's more training, quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
And again, these people who aren't really looking into the details, they have concluded based on just a correlation, no detail, no causal relationship. They've concluded that, well, the rise in youth soccer injuries is coming from overtraining. That's what they're calling it. And so, of course, if I tell you that, if you have a son or daughter that's, playing soccer and, their injuries are going up, and I say, I'm a scientist, and I say, well, the rise in these injuries is because they're overtraining. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to train less, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what happens. So eventually we got these rules put in place, like you cannot train more than 3 days a week. Practices cannot be more than 90 minutes long. All of these things where we're restricting the amount of training that goes on. And so this is the problem with that thought process. Okay. Yes. In the last few decades, the amount of soccer time in practice went up. But what went down at the exact same time was all of the other exercise that children used to do in school recess, in gym class, after school, playing with their friends in an unstructured environment. All of it got cut out. I would argue that there's a correlation between the cutting of physical activity in children and technology.
You're
because they didn't
absolutely
used
right.
to have iPads, they didn't used to have cell phones. Parents were not really scared. I remember I was a kid in the 80s. Parents were not scared to let their kids go and play outside and play in the backyard and all those things. So anyway, together, what do we get? Well, we get a misdiagnosis of the problem. The problem was a rise in youth injuries. It was incorrectly diagnosed as overtraining. In fact, and here's again where my research comes into it. So I have conducted over 10,000 fitness tests on youth soccer players. Wow. Okay, not as young as 4 years old, but I have tested 8, 9-year-olds, and I've tested a lot of, from the grade 7, from age, 13 and up. It's probably about maybe 7 or 8,000 that I've done. Okay, and I can tell you across Canada, nobody is in shape. Nobody.
Yeah.
The fitness tests are very low. Now, you cannot, this is why I call it an overtraining myth. You cannot be overtraining if you are not in shape. Overtraining, the definition is it's a phenomenon that occurs when an athlete is training for 3, 4, 5 hours a day at a high intensity without enough recovery. Before overtraining happens, the fitness level of the athletes is really high. Yeah. This is like, think of a gymnast or a swimmer that is, swimming in the morning, lifting weights in the afternoon, yoga at night, like every day, over and over and over again. That's who experiences overtraining. Soccer players in Canada, youth soccer players, are not even close to overtraining. They're lucky if they're training 8 hours a week, and most of the intensity of those training sessions is very low.
Yeah.
Okay, so we know they're not overtraining because they're not in shape.
Yeah.
So we know then that the cause of this rise of injuries in youth soccer cannot be overtraining. That's why I call it the overtraining myth. It's a myth.
Yeah,
It's not true.
I agree with
So
you. Look,
yeah,
Richard, I don't know, like you're in Ontario. I'll just let you know
yeah,
how it works in Quebec. Most clubs, when it be at the U9 to U12 level, they have 2 practices a week, and those practices are station based.
yeah.
So you get on the field, there's sometimes 3, sometimes 4 stations. So you do 15 minutes of one station, then you move to the other. Not a lot of cardio going on. I remember when I was a kid, we were doing laps. We were running up and down the mountain to get our cardio going. That's completely gone here. I don't know in Ontario if it's the same. And secondly, those trainings are very like individualistic to help the kids develop their skills like on their own type of thing. They do exercises with their friends. There's no like team thing going on at this time. So I agree with you in terms of overtime. How's that possible? There's no running. They only do those stations, and then there's a game a week. That's what's offered. Like you go to any amateur club to register your child. You'll go on their site. They all follow the same template. At that age group, the competitive level is those 2 training sessions plus a game a week. And what I found ironic in all this, it was us coaches that are very passionate that pushed our club to say, hey, like I coached my son this summer, I want a third practice. I want to be alone with my kids, and I need them to get ready for the game they're going to play on Saturday. Because those 2 sessions, just doing those stations, it's okay. I have nothing wrong with it. They do need to develop their skills. I feel it doesn't get them ready for the intensity of what it's like to play in a match because there's no hard cardio going on and there's no training as a group. So, yeah, it just to reinforce your point, where when we were kids, we did a lot of running. And so I agree with you. There can be overtraining when you're barely running the way the system is set up now. I was just curious, in Ontario, is it the same thing?
More or less, yes.
More or less. Okay.
And remember that a lot of these guidelines, like again, it's cyclical, okay? Because once the incorrect diagnosis of the problem came in, which is, well, why are kids getting hurt? Well, they're getting hurt because they're training too much. So what did they start doing? They started training less. Now, again, what I'm proposing, and I think you've got it right, is they're not getting hurt because they're training too much. They're actually getting hurt because they're under. So they're not getting hurt because they're overtraining.
Yeah.
They're getting hurt because they're undertraining. They're not training enough, and then they go and play games where the load is very high and they're not physically prepared. So if you follow that logic, they're being told that they're getting hurt because they're training too much. Then restrictions come in at the club level, which say, well, you got to minimize the training. Now they're training less. So now they're even less fit and even less prepared. Now they're going to get hurt even more. So what's the solution again? Train even less. Keep doing less, keep doing less. And as I said, I believe part of this is tied into this concept of self-esteem. Why? Because training and exercise is a form of resistance. And at some point, whether it's running or soccer or whatever, kids are going to get tired. They're going to get a little bit uncomfortable.
Yes.
Fitness is not always fun, but you need a certain intensity, you need a certain amount of resistance in order to develop. So it's a problem here, as I'm sure you've identified it over there. Again, keep in mind, it's not just that they are not doing enough in their practices. Okay, that's clear. In the practice itself, the intensity is too low. I'm going to get to coach education in a sec and why I think what's causing that. So it's not just that they're not doing enough in their practices, and it's not just that there aren't enough practices. It is also a lack of all other exercise. Okay?
Yes.
Again, schools have cut physical education and they've cut funding for their sports programs. Kids sometimes that play in some of these soccer clubs are actually told by the clubs, don't play school soccer, don't play school sports. Okay, so they're prevented from doing that. Parents are busier, parents are working more. There's more technology in the home now. So when a kid comes home, rather than going and exercising or doing any activity, they're on an iPad. So the only exercise they're getting is the soccer, and the soccer isn't enough, and the soccer is being decreased.
Yeah.
All of this is leading to
Yeah.
Under training. Now, why is under training such a problem? To understand that, we need to understand periodization of training. Periodization, one of the basic principles is the principle of overload, which means, I mentioned
Yeah.
you need to encounter resistance in order to get better.
Yes.
You can think of overload as resistance. Okay, so if you have a certain level of fitness, whatever it is, you need to do a little more than that, you need a bit of an overload in order to get better. Okay,
Yeah.
and there's a real easy way that you can actually measure the load. Okay, you can take an average of what the kids are doing over 3 weeks. You can measure load. I teach coaches how to do this. Okay,
Yeah.
and if you know the average load or how hard basically the kids are working over a 3 or 4 week period, then what you do in the next few sessions or the next week, it has to be a little bit above that, but it has to be a minimum of about 5% above it
5. Okay.
and a maximum of 20. So that's the range. And if you do that, you will improve, but you will not be, running the risk of overtraining. Okay, so now, maybe a simple way to look at it, think about lifting weights. Imagine if you could bench press, 100 pounds. Okay, now you've been bench pressing 100 pounds for a month. Okay, so you're getting stronger maybe, right? But now, immediately I put 175 pounds. Would you be able to lift it?
No.
No, because it's 75% higher.
It's too much. Yeah.
Too much. But you might be able to do 115 or 120.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that's the idea. So periodization of training load is about making these small incremental increases in load. Now, when we take soccer players who are not exercising outside of soccer, who are not getting enough training in their soccer program, the load is very low, the fitness is very low. Immediately, now they play a game, the load is too high. The game is probably 50, 60, maybe even 100% higher than what they have been doing.
Yeah, I agree with you.
It is under training, which is keeping them unfit. And then the too great of a discrepancy in load when they play these games that is actually causing injuries. And again, because, and I'll get to coach education and even the leadership in the provinces and in the country who are not competent. They don't understand this stuff because they've never studied it. No one's ever explained it to them. And because they don't understand, I'm talking the leadership, the director of development, the people who, the manager of coach education, these people that hold these titles, they don't know anything about this stuff. And because they don't know, they don't teach coaches. And since the coaches don't know, coaches don't implement it. That's the cause of this. So, I go back to because you asked me what's the problem, in that, 4 years old to 12 years old age category. The first thing is this overemphasis on self-esteem at the expense of letting young kids experience any form of resistance. The second is not enough exercise, not enough soccer. And it doesn't even need to be from the clubs. I understand sometimes that clubs, they have to pay for fields. They have it may not be practical. I get that. But then there has to be a real push among everybody to tell kids, look, if you want to develop yourself as an athlete, you need to be playing soccer every day. And if you're not playing soccer, you need to be playing something else. If your school has a track and field team and a cross-country team and a whatever, volleyball, you should be playing all of those sports, every single one of them. Kids, especially before puberty, you mentioned, up to 12, that's before puberty. They are small, they are light, and their muscles are more pliable, and they're not producing as high forces, which means the risk of injury from doing, I don't even want to use that word, overtraining.
Yeah, for a young kid, overtraining. When I was a kid, we were running every day. We were always outside.
Kids can exercise every day. As a matter of fact, when they get older, when they go through puberty and they get bigger and stronger, that's actually when you have to be more careful with the load.
Yeah.
So we've got it backwards. We tell kids at 10 years old, no more than 2 practices a week. It's all small. Then as they get older, we start, increasing.
Yeah.
We should turn that upside down. We should be telling kids when they're 10 years old, as I said, as much exercise as you can do.
Yeah.
And again, go back to, you said, what's the difference between Canada and other countries? one of the things that you will still see, I saw it in Uruguay when I was there, is kids playing soccer by themselves in the backyard, against a wall, on the school, wherever, with a ball a lot, and also playing with their friends a lot. So they are accumulating from age 4, 5, 6, all the way to 10. They are accumulating hours and hours and hours of exercise that our young athletes are not. So anyway, that's my 2 cents about that. Sorry, the phone is ringing, but nobody comes until 12. So,
No, you really touched a point regarding playing and exercise and all that. Yeah, it's easy today to complain with the technology. We were lucky. We grew up when there was no internet. We didn't have iPads. We didn't have all these video games. So what are you going to do? Instead of staying in the house doing nothing, it was easy for us to go outside and play. And we played all the time. Even in the winter, it could have been -10 outside. We were always outside, Richard. So today, for sure, it doesn't help that we shelter the kids. Not only, like you said earlier, they're sheltered, like worried about their self-esteem. You can't criticize. You have to, everybody gets a medal and all this stuff. But we're even sheltering them when it comes to this stuff, like, oh, it's cold outside, stay home, or you can only do organized activities. Whereas when we were growing up, we just go to the park, no adult supervision, and we just go and play on our own. We didn't have the requirement, to have a supervisor there. So this whole thing, it accumulates, and it's sad to see. It's really, really sad.
And I'll tell you, I've, as much as I can in my career, I've tried to, form my opinions based on evidence. I mean, obviously, I'm working as a scientist and a researcher, and we have to do that. And so, again, I'm not an expert in psychology. I wish I was, but I've looked into. I found one amazing study. It was not done in athletes, but it was done in with kindergarten students, where they looked at something called praise. Praise meaning the type of encouragement, or the way you speak to children based on how they perform a task. So they took these young children and they put them into two groups, and they gave them a task which was challenging, but which was not something that was so difficult that they couldn't do it. So it took them some time to accomplish the task, but they were able to do it. And at the end of that, one group received a certain type of praise and another got a different. So the one group was praised for their effort, meaning they were told, oh, wow, Marcello, you really worked hard. You must have really worked hard to do that. So there was a direct connection between the effort you put in and the reward. And the other group was praised for sort of just being smart, or they were told, oh, wow, Marcello, look, oh, you're so smart. You're such a smart guy. So in that case, there is no connection between effort and reward. The reward is it's inherent. The reward is expected. So if you were receiving that kind of praise all the time, you might grow up to think, well, I'm smart. I don't need to work hard. And whenever somebody gives me something that's difficult, of course I'll be able to do it because I'm smart. So this was kind of groundbreaking research. The author's name is not coming to me, but perhaps by the time this gets posted, I'll send you the link. And
I'd definitely like to read it.
People can look into it, but this is very, very well defined in the literature, which is that there's a direct relationship between the type of teaching, instruction, praise that young children receive, and then their attitudes later. Okay, so what happened in the same study later on, because this was sort of it was a longitudinal, they did a follow-up, and they looked at academic performance. And again, these are kindergarten, grade 1, like it's not exactly that easy to measure performance. But what they did find was that the children who received praise based on effort, they were performing better in school, and they also had more self-esteem and self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is your belief in your ability to accomplish something. The ones that were praised because, told, well, you're doing well because you're smart. So they were praised, made to think that they have some inherent gift. Correct. They ended up performing worse in the follow-up, and they ended up with lower self-esteem. So what I'm saying, again, And I think more research needs to be done on this, but we need to be, we need to be really clear and critical of some of the ideas that are coming out. I'm not so sure that even though these coaches and these, ideologically driven people that think that they are helping kids' self-esteem by preventing them from experiencing any resistance, I don't think they actually are helping self-esteem. I actually think they are hurting self-esteem. And and I think that's something which we really need to look into, because you talked about that age category. Well, at U13 and U14 is where everyone else in the world gets really serious, and that's where, ironically enough, that's where the gaps exist in our development. So maybe we can transition into that now.
So it's a good segue, because the thing I remarked through my own experience, seeing my older son, he played till U12 and then he lost interest. He didn't want to play anymore, which saddened me as a soccer nut that I am. And I love the sport so much, and I really, really care about the development of the kids. But he had his reason. I didn't force him. I told my son, "You're 13 years old. You want to continue playing? I'll register you. You don't want to play anymore? Not a problem." Where I had a problem, however, it's again what you said earlier. By sheltering the kids the way that we've been sheltering them, and when it comes to their development to pursue the sport later on, I do find there was a lot of emphasis, what I've noticed in the amateur clubs here. A lot of the focus is on the competitive side of the sport. You could tell, like, in terms of how much money is spent for the programs itself, the tech stuff involved, and like the house league side of it, which, it's supposed to be a fun sport. There's quite a few kids that just play the sport because they just enjoy, but they don't want to become a professional player, and they just want to enjoy it for the sake of playing it. I believe if something would be done at that end to properly identify the kids, even at that point, to say which avenue you're going to pursue, the house league route or the competitive one, even there, as a technical director, as a coach, as someone involved in the sport, to do these proper evaluations, there's nothing wrong with being honest with the child in terms of looking where they are in their development to put them in the right environment. But here, unfortunately, they came up with a system where everyone is looped together, and it's the parent that decides, when they pay to register their child, that they're going to be put in that environment because that's the one they paid for. But there's certain kids where I saw with my own eyes, the kid's not ready to play in competitive, but just because the parent paid, they stay with the competitive group, and it's demoralizing for the child, who is like 3 steps behind his peers. Whereas had he gone the house league route, he could have enjoyed himself, touched the ball more. It's not as competitive. They develop their skills at a less, we talked about resistance. There, the resistance will probably be lower. But I always believe you pool kids by the same ability. And because they don't do that, I think that's another reason why, when they get to 13 years old, the type of the quality of the resistance too, I find at U11, U12,
it's not there.
Is not very good as it should be. Now, is that the same thing in Ontario as well, that you've noticed in other parts of the world, that type of competitiveness that they face before they get to 13?
Yeah, it's pretty common, So okay. I guess again, I don't think that there are too many differences between Quebec and Ontario. I mean, it's cultural a little bit maybe, but in the sport, it sounds pretty similar. So I'll speak about the older ages now, and this is, I know I've talked about, maybe I even talked to you guys about this before, but I'll mention it again, which is, so when I lived in Uruguay, it really opened my eyes, because I had always heard things, and I traveled and seen, but there I was there for a long time, and I really got a good look at everything that's going on. And it's an interesting country, because Uruguay has only 3 million people, and they are, per capita, you could argue they're the most successful soccer nation ever. I mean, if you look in the history of the game, they are.
Agree.
I mean, they are, right? They've won 2 World Cups. And remember, they put 4 stars on their shirt. I was schooled on this. You know they have 4, eh? You know why they have 4?
No, how come they have
2
4?
World Cups, but 2 Olympic championships in the 1920s, which was before
Oh,
the World
okay.
Cup existed. So
Interesting. I didn't
they've
know
been,
that.
they've,
Yeah.
you know, if you go there, you cannot say that they've been world champion only 2 times. You have to say 4
4.
anyway. And then I've lost count of how many Copa Americas. I mean, they may have won more than 10. I mean, it's so
Yeah.
some of the smaller nations now, like Croatia, you know, Iceland, whatever, they've been more competitive now. But historically, Uruguay is the best per capita. There's no doubt
Yeah.
about it. And they're still getting to the World Cups. They're still winning. They won an under 20 World Cup under 20 World Cup recently. You know, they're competitive at the top level. They're producing a lot of good players. They're producing a lot of good coaches. So learning what they do is useful. Up until under 14 in Uruguay, they have something called baby football. It looks Marcello, it looks like the least serious house league program that we have in Canada. It's just they have a small field somewhere. There's a bunch of kids. There's a coach that is just yelling and screaming. The parents are yelling and screaming. It's, you know, it's fun, but it's competitive a little bit, but it's just very, very you know, simple and rudimentary. Now, at under 14, Montevideo, it's the capital city of Uruguay, okay? There are over 20 professional clubs in that city. Every single professional club has scouts who are knowledgeable, experienced professionals.
Yeah.
And they go and watch baby football, and they identify who they think are the most talented players, and it's a competitive process. So we know that baby football alone is not developing players because it's just house league. The players, as I said, are developing mostly on their own.
Yeah.
Without any of the impediments that we have in Canada. They exercise all the time. They play soccer all the time. If their particular team has a chance to go play tournaments or this, that, they do it. Nobody tells them not to. There's no sanctions. There's no rules.
Yeah.
They play after school. They do all of the things that, you know, that we don't do. And they have a competitive mindset, which we don't have, because they're not treated like they're special from the time that they're, you know, 2 years old.
Right.
So somehow that environment is working really well because, again, from that environment, you can look at all of Cavani, Suarez, Godin, all of them came initially from that environment, okay? It gets serious at U14. Players who are talented. It has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with connections. The scouts scouts identify them. Now, of course, there's, you know, wheelings and dealings, and, you know, one kid doesn't want to go to one academy, he wants to go to another. But remember, it's competitive. Here in Toronto, right, in our big city, I don't even know what the population of our city is now if we go GTA, but it's, you know, more than 1 million for sure, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, we have only one professional academy, and it's part of a league which is not really a professional league because the league doesn't have the things in it that a professional league has. So that one professional academy, and again, in Montreal, you have one, and in Vancouver, they have one, and that's it. So those academies, they don't function like real professional academies because they have no competition. It doesn't matter in Toronto if Toronto FC does a good job or a bad job scouting or identifying players. It makes no difference.
Yeah.
It doesn't even matter if Toronto FC does a good job or a bad job developing players. And by the way, you can look at the senior roster of Toronto FC and you can see that what I'm saying is true because we have almost no players in the senior roster at Toronto FC who were identified by the academy and developed through the academy.
Yeah.
Why? Because there's no competition and there's no incentive. So, you know, these players that are identified into the so-called professional academies here, we have no idea whether they're the best players. We know for sure that they're not getting an optimal development because there is no competition. There's no incentives. You know, again, I said I'll talk about coaching. I'll get to that in a second. That's also not optimal. And so the end result is not optimal. Now, keep in mind, that men's U-17 team that we talked about, right? Guess where 100%, there are 3 programs where 100% of the players that represented Canada at the men's U-17 World Cup came from. Guess where they are?
They're all from the MLS academies.
Toronto FC Academy,
Yeah.
CF Montreal or Montreal Impact Academy, and Vancouver Whitecaps Academy. So remember when I said it's possible that we're not, our players aren't good enough because we're not developing them well enough. And it's also possible that we don't have the best players in the national team because we haven't identified them. Well,
now tell me something that you mentioned.
yeah.
Could it be a matter of convenience, knowing that they're all from the academies in Canada? It will be too much work to see if there was a Canadian player in Europe and South America to go scout. Then they have to come here and integrate.
Okay.
Is that like, could it be
it very well could be. But then my answer to that would be, can you find me another national team in a country that is serious about competing for and winning World Cups that would make that argument? Can you find me another team where the coaches and the scouts or whoever's involved would say, well, yeah, there are probably, and forget Europe or whatever. I'm talking about, we have talented players here in Toronto who are probably just as good, if not better, than the ones that are playing in Toronto FC.
Yeah. And I would argue in Montreal, not all the best players play for the
academy. And Marcello, it can't be, because the academy only has about 20 or 25 players in each age group anyway.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that in a huge city like Montreal, there's only 25 or 30?
Impossible.
No way.
Yeah.
So even by the numbers alone, it's impossible. Then again, they don't have professional scouts. There's no, the coaching is very poor. And so there's a lot of factors that are making it really obvious that these academy teams do not have the most talented players. So if a national team coach wants to bury his head in the sand and say, well, it's too hard, I don't have the resources to go and scout, I'll let Toronto FC and Vancouver and Montreal do the scouting for me. Fine, they can say that. You're right, it is more convenient. But you will not
again,
find,
that's just an opinion. I'm not stating a fact.
No, I know.
Just to make it clear, I have no idea how they do this.
Right. But what I'm saying is, you will not find a serious football association anywhere in the world that would put up with that. And if somebody suggested that in any other country, like if there was a coach that said, I don't have the time or the effort to scout, so let's forget about those guys. Let's just focus on these ones. They would be fired. That would be unacceptable. So the fact that it is accepted here tells me that the leadership here don't care. They don't care about developing players, and they don't care about identifying who the best players are. Because if they did, they would not accept this. This would be unacceptable. Okay? And now I'm going to take a step backward. Do you know how players are identified into the professional academy, so-called professional academies in Canada?
No, I have no idea.
All right. Well, I'll tell you, it's not like Uruguay where clubs have scouts. And so the professional academies, again, I say, I'm putting air quotes there because they're not professional. But our professional academies don't have scouts, and the scout and whatever they do have, it's mostly phone calls, connections, whatever. They don't have anybody that's actually going and looking everywhere. So what have we done? I know Ontario very well. I don't know. I think Quebec, BC are a little different, but here in Ontario, we've created this so-called player development league, which, by the way, costs $5,000 to $10,000 per player per year to participate in.
Oh wow! Yeah.
And the majority of the identification and the pathway that ends up at the Toronto FC Academy starts in that league. So that league has no standards by which they determine who gets in and who doesn't.
Yeah.
They say they have tryouts and all that, but I've been through it and I've seen it. Okay.
Yeah.
They will take, as you said, they will take anybody who pays. And so from that league, which is cost prohibitive,
right,
which a lot of people don't trust, don't like, even if they can afford it, they don't want to be in it. That league leads to the provincial program, Ontario provincial program. The Ontario provincial program leads to the NDC, or the talented pathway. And
Yeah.
Toronto FC Academy primarily is getting its players from that provincial program and that talented pathway. So this is a system which is corrupted and biased from the start, because there is no standards-based identification to get into the player
Yeah.
development league. And
Right.
there's a cost barrier which is significant.
Yeah.
We're talking, as I said, $5,000 to $10,000 per player per year. And it is that program that ends up funneling into the Toronto FC Academy, which then funnels into the men's under 17 national team. I believe there are significant problems at every step of that pathway. And I haven't even yet talked about coaching. So
Yeah.
like it is, again, when I was in Uruguay, I talked to people about this.
Yeah.
And they can't believe it. Like literally they can't believe it. They say, wait a minute. You identify everyone into your provincial program from a league where you have to pay, and you tell parents of young players,
Yeah.
if they want to get into the provincial program, they have to be in this league where they pay.
Yeah.
This is unheard of. My problem is not even with the cost. I run a business here. We work with athletes. We charge money and they pay us to train them. Lots of other programs. I'm sure your club, every program has a cost. The
Yeah.
cost is not the problem. The problem is making it mandatory to be identified into a league where you have to pay.
Right.
That's the problem.
Yeah. I know.
And
I
that
hear you.
and honestly, unless we get over that hurdle, there's no sense even talking about the rest. But that's where it leads to. Now,
Yeah.
I think we need to transition to talk about coaching though.
No, for sure. And
yeah.
just to my knowledge anyway, not that I'm an expert, I'm just a dad, parent, volunteer coach. Okay, just to let know I don't have the credentials that you do.
But you know what you're
But from
talking
what
about.
I know, we don't have that in Quebec. I never heard of a league that you had to spend that kind of money to join this league, and from that pool they identify players. I think here we don't have that. I do know they do some kind of scouting. They work with the clubs at a regional level to get some of the kids when they're 12 years old. Let us know which ones have potential. Because CF Montreal cannot have the resources to send a scout of every single amateur club on the island to go see with their own eyes which kid has potential to join their academy. They depend on the club and the region to identify them.
All right. I only want to just challenge you on that statement, and only just food for thought. Okay.
Yeah,
all right?
Absolutely.
So because this I call it it's a backwards system of player identification. Okay. So
Yeah.
if the player development league, or I don't know what it is in Quebec, but if that league, whatever it is it's the coaches from that league, the coaches of the players, who are telling the provincial program who their best players are. Okay. If that's the system, that is a backwards system. That's a biased system. Okay. Player identification needs to be objective. It needs to be scouts that don't necessarily know. I mean, of course, maybe they know which clubs are good and whatever, but they are coming in, providing an objective, unbiased opinion, and they need to watch players multiple times. Maybe you're correct that they don't have the resources to travel and go, but that doesn't matter. We have videos now. We don't need people to travel. It's a misunderstanding to me of the way things could be done.
But I'm talking at a young age, Richard, to identify the 12-year-olds that could have potential to join the younger CF Montreal Academy.
Okay, yeah, but I'm talking about that too, and what I'm saying is that if we're going to continue to rely on the coaches of those players to tell the higher level programs who their best players are, that's a flaw. That's not an optimal system. That's because then we're vulnerable to bias.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And again, I use the example of Montevideo. For them, professional academies, the first age group is under 14, which means they're looking at 12 and 13-year-olds in the baby football. The clubs are looking The clubs are not talking to the baby football coaches and asking
Yeah.
the baby football coaches to tell them who their best players are. So that's a problem. And again, I think
Yeah.
funding for sports could be managed better so that more funding could be made available for scouts, because
Yeah.
scouting in the rest of the world, again, I speak about Uruguay, I've been
Right.
I've been all over, I've been to Portugal, Italy, Spain. Scouting is a serious business in
Yeah.
those countries, and here it is really not taken seriously at all.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we go into coaching, and because to be honest, most of the people who are quote unquote scouting here, well, they're coaches. Okay, everyone, of course, who's working in those academies are coaches, and the provincial
Yeah.
coaches and all that. So this is another big flaw which I see in Canada. I know I talked to you guys about this last time, so I'll try to keep it even more brief and
No
get your
problem.
take on it. But what we have in Canada in terms of the way that we educate coaches is the equivalent of a medical school where the professors and the teachers are not physicians and have no experience practicing medicine, or a
Yeah.
law school where the professors and the teachers are not lawyers and have no experience practicing law. The people who are the instructors in the Canadian and the provincial licensing courses are not knowledgeable, experienced, competent coaches. So we have inexperienced, incompetent teachers who are then teaching and certifying our coaches. Anywhere else in
Yeah.
the world, when you look at
Yeah.
who are the instructors in the national licensing courses, it is almost always the best coaches in the country, the ones that are working in the national teams, the ones that are working in professional clubs, and the ones that have a proven track record of success.
Yeah.
They've been doing it for 20, 30 years. You don't become an instructor. You certainly don't become a director. A director is the one who's in charge of the whole program, unless you have a lot of experience and a proven track record. Here in Canada, we have the exact opposite. We have the directors in Canada and in the provinces are people who have almost never coached at all, never mind at a high level. They've almost never coached at all. All of the instructors, they are people who have coached at the amateur club level and
Mm-hmm.
maybe the college and university level. So we have nobody, neither the directors nor those underneath them, that have any high level experience. And they are the ones that are teaching and training and certifying the rest of the coaches. It is the blind leading the blind. And of
Right.
course, those are the coaches that end up working in the player development league, that end up working in the so-called professional academy, and so on. So that would be another issue that I believe needs to be fixed immediately. Is we need competent, knowledgeable, experienced people in leadership roles.
Mm-hmm.
And if we
Yeah.
can't find them here, we need to go to other countries to find them. Or we need to have our coaches do internships, like I did. I mean, mine wasn't an internship, it was a job.
Yeah.
But we need people who have worked in other countries and have that experience and track record, and then come back to Canada. Okay. And they need to be in charge. And then the instructors, again, need to be just a level below that, but they need to be people that have high level experience, because we are doing a poor job of developing coaches. So we don't identify players properly. We don't
Right.
put them through the pathway in an optimal way. We don't coach them properly, and we don't coach or develop our coaches properly. We have all of those things working against us. And the end result is national teams which are not competitive anymore.
Yeah, and it's really sad. Like now we could move on to the results of that tournament. I'm
Yeah.
gonna just put a little graphic here.
Yeah.
So it hurts my heart, I have to say. Don't get me wrong. I know we're not a powerhouse, okay? So we have to put things into perspective. But these are the kids that one day will aspire to play maybe one day on the national team. I wouldn't expect Canada to win all three games. But from what I saw, we can discuss what you saw as well. The score, like I look at that Spain one, just looking at the score, you would say that game is Canada's best game. For
Yeah.
me, that was their worst game
The
from
way
what
the way
I
they
saw.
played. Yeah. Yeah. They just
It
didn't
was
concede as
men
much. Yeah. Yeah.
against boys.
Yeah.
So, from what I saw, and again, this is from a parent perspective. I mean, I'm not an expert. I believe our kids in that group, they're not well prepared before they go into the tournament. And you see when they were put under stress, they made a lot of mistakes, especially in that Spain game. The red card didn't help. I think it scared them off even more. Like they're figuring, oh my God, we're already playing Spain. That's a quite an opponent to begin with. You get a red card, you're playing more on the defensive as well.
Yeah.
You saw there was like a lot of mistakes when they're really put under pressure. So I'm thinking one of the issues was in terms of the preparation to go into the tournament. I don't know what they're supposed to do. Like, should they maybe do a camp and stay together? Maybe 2, 3 weeks would have been good to go somewhere so the players who normally don't play together get to know each other better, build more a camaraderie and a chemistry. Would that have helped? Also, when it comes to the preparation, like you said, on the coaching level, did the coaches also, while they don't have their kids, have to gain their own resistance per se to be in other environments, like you said earlier, where they could have been more ready themselves to deal with situations as they occur? Because sometimes games could be hard and you have to do tactical adjustments. You have to see what your opponent is doing, and you had your game plan, but if your game plan is not working, now you need to react and you need to adjust. Did they lack maybe some experience as well? No fault of their own. I'm not judging their qualities as a coach. I'm saying, were they given enough of for themselves and their preparation and their development to be ready to play in such an environment? So, yeah, go ahead.
All right. Well, yeah. I mean, again, I think like the what leads up to these players
Yeah,
getting to the national team. We've kind of talked about it already, and so
yeah,
it's good that we qualified for the tournament. I don't think we can expect, honestly. I just don't
yeah.
think we can expect to be competitive in these international tournaments unless we fix everything that leads up
Right.
to us, even to the qualification. Because I know we talked offline, and even more recently than this, our women's U-17 team, which has historically been much better. I was part of a few of them,
Yeah,
10 years ago, 12 years ago, that got to quarterfinals of the World Cup. And
yeah,
this year, our women's U-17 team did not qualify for the World Cup. And that I'm not sure if that's even ever happened before. But so
yeah,
we're starting to perform worse than we used to relative
yeah,
to the rest of the world. So we have to fix, what happens leading up to it, or else we cannot expect to be competitive. Now,
yeah.
let's talk about leadership and coaching in this particular team. I don't know if you know, but the head coach of this team is someone who had been involved in women's national team soccer for a long time. We're talking over 12 years,
Hmm.
and had poor results with our women's under 20 national team previously. So not only do we have, oh, and by the way, it's someone trained and educated as a coach in Canada, only ever worked in Canada, etc. So not only do we have this really, really flawed system of coach
Yeah.
education and coach development, we have, and this is kind of unique to Canada, okay,
Hmm.
when coaches in the highest levels, that's national team, professional clubs, when they fail to get results, when they lose 3 games in a group stage of a World Cup, when they don't qualify for a World Cup, when they underperform, in Canada, we give them a promotion. We put them in charge of a better team, of a higher level team, of a different team. Again, I'm a professional, and I don't want to name names or whatever, but it doesn't matter who the person is. In another country, even if you're a good coach, sometimes you still lose. And when you lose, you're held accountable.
Yeah.
The firing or the replacement of a coach isn't always even seen as a punishment. I've seen interviews with, Spalletti and lots of coaches that
Yeah.
end up saying something similar. They'll say something like, you know what? I didn't really get it right this time. You know,
Yeah.
it's a learning experience. Doesn't mean they're never going to get a job again, but certainly they don't get rewarded for it. Remember we talked about with kids rewarding them
R-
for, right?
Right.
So we have that even at the senior national team level. Our women's national team just significantly underperformed in a World Cup last year. We didn't get out of the group. We were
Yeah.
supposed to, we were the gold medalists. We were supposed to be competing to try to win the whole thing. And we underperformed. What did they do? They renewed the contract for the head coach for another 6 years. I would like to challenge you to find another country in the world where that has happened, where the national
No.
team of the head coach of a successful national team. Remember, this World Cup was 2023. The gold medal was 2021. We were supposed to be competitive with the best in the world. We have some of the best female players in the world. So we fail. Find me another national team that fails at that level, and the
Yeah.
head coach gets renewal of their contract for 6 years. So what we're doing, and it keeps happening. Again, as I said, we hire the director of development that's never coached before. We hire a general secretary who has no administrative experience at all. We put people into assistant coaching roles when they've never coached. Like we keep doing this. So to me, it makes a mockery of the entire coaching profession. And, I've written about this and I've said basically the message to coaches, especially to professional coaches who are aspiring to get to that level is, guys,
Yeah.
don't worry about it. You're never going to get this job anyway. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't matter how many results you get. It doesn't matter how many players you develop. It doesn't matter how many degrees or certifications you get. It doesn't matter because we're not going to reward you for that. We're only going to hire someone if it's a friend of ours or if it fits our agenda or there's a political decision to be made.
And I'm
And even,
wondering
yeah,
if
and
it's
even if,
also
even,
a
yeah,
budget
even,
thing as well.
well, I'll get
Because
to
it
that in a
costs
minute, but
it costs money, right, to get the.
no, I'll get to that in a minute,
Okay,
but
no problem.
I'll say, even if the person we hire fails, we'll give them a better job because the standards don't
Yeah.
matter. You mentioned budget. Here's my answer to that, and I can
Okay.
speak from personal experience.
Hmm.
Okay, most of the people outside of the head coaches of the senior teams, most of the coaches working in the other environments are paid only for the days that they are away with the national team. They're not even full time.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Okay. And I'm talking even the head coaches of those teams. So all of us, I mean, I say us because I was involved with
Yeah.
women's national teams, and all of us, we had other jobs. Okay. So is
Yeah.
funding and budget a problem? Absolutely. Because we do have to compete, for example, with the United States, where all the coaches, everybody is full time. So we don't have that. But
Yeah.
it's an honor. It's an honor to represent your country and to
For
coach
sure it is.
for your country in a CONCACAF competition and for a World Cup. And I know that there are dozens of very, very qualified, experienced, competent coaches that are working in the club system right now. I can, off the top of my head, I can list about 20 that have a UEFA A license, about 5 or 6 that have a UEFA Pro license, that have experience, as I said, at actual professional levels.
Yeah.
They didn't get their license from some Canadian coach that has never coached before. They got it in a professional environment.
Yeah.
And they would kill for the chance to coach in one of those teams, even if they were only paid a few $100s a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, at some point, if you want to attract, I know there was talk about Ancelotti and coaches like that, of course. But don't think that that John Herdman wasn't paid a lot of money for that role. It's not like it's not like the budget isn't there. They
Right.
mismanaged the money, and there's the business dealings. Maybe we don't have time to talk about that now. So definitely,
Yeah.
I don't think that the money is being spent in the optimal way. But
Yeah,
the
that
reason
I agree with you because for sure, if there was more funding, could we make an argument if they were providing more money either to do camps, to play more friendlies, to do more technical work together, would we have seen a better result? Perhaps,
Perhaps, yeah.
Perhaps,
Yeah,
yeah.
perhaps.
So just saying money was the issue is not
No.
fully diagnosing the
Yeah,
situation. So it would
and
have helped. It
yeah,
would have
and
helped,
yeah,
but
but
it
even
goes
if
beyond
they
that.
had more money, if they're still hiring incompetent coaches,
Right.
it wouldn't matter. Even if we had more money, if we're still using this pathway, which is
Right.
corrupted, biased, with very, very poor coaching all the way through, it wouldn't matter. That's why I said, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, an extra training camp might have helped a little bit, but we have to be honest. If you take Spain out of this group, I mean, yeah, Mali is kind of an emerging African nation, and they have
Yeah.
talent for sure. Uzbekistan, I don't know a lot about them, but it's not like we played Spain and Brazil and Germany. It's not like we played Spain and France and the Netherlands, or
Yeah.
or Argentina, or
Yeah.
at some point we should be able to at least be competitive with these teams. I'm not saying to beat them all the time,
Yeah.
but we lost 2-0 in a game which we know could have been,
Yeah.
5 or 6 easily. We lost 3-0 also in a game which could have been more. And then, okay, the Mali game, they gave us every goal that they could have given us, but they gave us 5. So we're not even competitive.
Yeah.
And that's because of all the problems that I've outlined. So I just don't, it's not money.
Yeah. What
Because
about this though? I wanted to pick your brain on this.
Yeah.
I don't know the rosters of the other teams. I'm just taking a guess when it comes to Spain that some of those kids, they're highly talented ones, play in academies perhaps of the professional clubs, and they get opportunities to also train with the top clubs from time to time. So they have an advantage over us where do our U-17 kids play, and what kind of resistance, as you said earlier, and what competition do they face in comparison that when it comes to arriving at this tournament, it's really men against boys, because we don't have the same type of leagues and environments where the Spanish kids get to play in comparison.
we don't have those environments, and part of that is outside of our control, of course,
Yeah.
because we have what we have, and but we're not optimizing the environments we do have. Because you said, where do
Yeah.
our kids come from? Well, our kids are coming from a academy of a professional club, which is not incentivized to identify talented players, nor is it incentivized to develop talented players. And that academy also doesn't hire quality coaches. It hires coaches primarily based on nepotism, and the coaches that come in often are only educated by an amateur, unprofessional licensing system. So we have like all of those factors working against us, which are under our control. Okay, would it be nice if Montreal had 10 professional clubs and they were all competing for? Yeah, and maybe I mean, I like if the CPL expands, and we have League One in Ontario, you have your
You have League One in Quebec.
League One Quebec, and
Yeah.
so I'm a big fan of those leagues, and I think the more we can just professionalize them, though, we need to be more demanding of the coaches. They should be training more. There should be periodization. I think we need to involve university teams in the system as well, because university soccer in Canada is the coaching is quite good. There's a lot of good coaches there. They are professional in the sense that they train every day. They have good facilities. There's a lot of like we've got untapped resources here. And again, I blame, why are we not optimizing these things? Because we hire incompetent people at the top. They don't have the wherewithal. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have the willingness. Right. They're very they're very petty. They're very selfish and jealous, and it's the leadership could really make changes that could help us, but they don't do it, and they won't do it unless they were totally replaced by more competent people. And so, of course, yeah, you're right. I mean, in any European nation, the national team players are made up of players that are selected from among the top clubs in the country, and it's objective. And some of those boys that are 15 and 16, of course, they've probably played. If they haven't played with the senior team, maybe they've played with the U-19 team.
Right.
They're getting a much better. I mean, everything is better. The coaching
Yeah.
is better. The competition is better. The culture is different. All of
Yeah.
it. But we still have, as I said, we
Yeah.
still have talent. We still have good coaches that are not involved.
Yeah.
We have
So
potential that's not realized. So
no,
that's
for
our
sure.
problem. Yeah.
So basically, to conclude, because I already an hour of your time. I know we
No, it's
could
all good.
talk you
Yeah,
for
yeah,
two
yeah, yeah.
hours. I appreciate
Yeah.
all your wonderful
Yeah.
insights. I think we're both on the same wavelength to say our goal in terms of trying to dissect and talk about this is if we would get things in our own house under control and optimize it better. I do believe, even knowing that we cannot compete with La Liga in terms of those kids and what they get to experience. We're not asking Canada to do the same, it's impossible. But we can demand and push to have improvements. So when we do get to these U-17 tournaments, that we are more competitive, even though we're not expecting them to win it all. But when you saw how flat some of the games were, that's where I find we have a right to be a little bit critical. Because if we would optimize the way it works now, I think even though we can't compete with Spain to beat them, but we can show a little bit more fight than what we did show in the tournament.
100%. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we can be better. And it's not like Uzbekistan and Mali have these,
Right.
well-funded, elaborate, identification programs. I mean, they've got pro leagues and all that,
Yeah.
but lots of different nations are struggling with all kinds of things. And by the way,
Yeah.
a lot of the Europeans, I don't know Spain specifically, but I mean, I was just in Portugal a couple of years ago, and I can tell you it's really
Yeah.
interesting. Portugal is an interesting case study because they've been so successful. They won a European championship. They're the best in the world at futsal. Okay, they've
Mhm.
won 2 World Cups. I mean, their women's team is getting much, much better. They again, small country producing
Yeah.
lots of players. You know how critical they are of themselves? It's
Yeah.
unbelievable. I mean, I was there in 2022 for a conference, and they're talking about how disappointed they were in the previous World Cup, and like that. I mean,
Yeah.
at some point, I mean, okay, they actually want to win the World Cup. I mean, they've not won one yet, right? So
Yeah.
they believe they can do it. So can we believe we can win a World Cup? Not yet, but we have to believe. We cannot go into these tournaments with this
Yeah.
mindset that we're happy to be there.
Yeah.
So that's a
And one last
yeah,
point, Richard, before I let you go.
yeah.
I've talked about this often with my friends. The Canada making the World Cup since 1986 camouflage a little bit of what's going on to say, oh, we're on the right track, we're doing things well. My argument was if you look at who our key players were, most of them played in Europe. And it's that experience that they got there that helped them in terms of dealing with certain situations and how they perform at a high level. I believe that experience was critical. And also, I have to give credit to the coach. He did lead them to qualify for the World Cup, and they actually performed pretty well at the group stage to do it. So we can't just say it was all on the players. The coach, too, had his role in all this. But to reiterate what we were saying earlier, Canada making the World Cup, you saw the players with their experience at high level. Our kids at U-17 didn't have that same experience. You see like a correlation between the two.
I do.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely our best men's national team players are players who developed outside of Canada. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah,
And by
exactly.
the
Yeah.
way, that's always been the case.
Yeah.
You can go back to Julian de Guzman and that generation and all of it. So definitely, we got to keep in mind we had an exceptionally talented group of players, which I don't know that we've ever had
Oh,
that
for
much,
sure.
not
Absolutely.
not in my lifetime
I
anyway.
don't remember you.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that also we won our group in CONCACAF, but we were 2 losses away in tight games from actually coming fourth place. You can go
Yeah.
back and look that up. I don't know if you remember, but it was
No,
really
well,
tight.
yeah.
It was
No, for
really tight
sure.
all the way to the end, and
Yeah.
Herdman did well. We got the most out of this group,
Yeah.
but that one qualification, it's like judging the Italian national team for missing one World Cup and not looking at the consistency.
Yeah.
To be judged well, you need to have consistent results, or else that shows up as a little anomaly
Correct. Yeah.
amidst lots of other failures.
Yeah.
And by the way, we're still going with those failures now.
Yeah.
So it's too early to tell, but objectively speaking, I would say, of course, those results are going to camouflage what's happening behind the scenes, because
Yeah.
people who don't really know what's happening behind the scenes said, no, it's great. Like within 1 year, we
Yeah.
won an Olympic medal on the women's side, and we got to the World Cup, and it was great, and we deserved it. We did well.
Yeah.
But we need consistent results. So
Right.
with the women's team, we've already gone back down.
Yeah.
Men's team, well, you could argue we've, since that qualification, there's been nothing positive.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, and I don't think we can sustain positive results given, as I said, all of the
Yeah.
problems with identification, with coach education, with player development, with the corruption at the top level.
Yeah.
We need to fix that. If we don't fix that, we can't sustain it.
Yeah. Now we'll see with the under 20 how that's gonna go. Let's hope they don't just choose players like they did under 17.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, they have
Yeah.
chosen those players, so we'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see what happens.
We'll see
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah.
Richard, thank you so much for all your wonderful insights. It was really a good learning experience for myself as well too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that, with your expertise in, like, really, it's not just opinion, it's like actual data that you have to back up what you're saying. We would hope it would shed light and make things better moving forward. And it's voices like you that like to challenge the status quo that we can make things better in the future. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome, of course, and thank you so much for the opportunity. It's great to talk to you again, and of course, if you want to have me for a third time,
No,
later
I'm
on,
sure we will.
happy to do that too. So
very good. Thank you so much. And again, evangelistasports.com for all your soccer needs. Thank you for their support, and we'll catch you next time.